There is a moment quiet, invisible, yet seismic when human certainty collapses, when explanations run out, when logic no longer holds, when answers refuse to come. Most people fear that moment, but it is precisely there, in that breathless gap, between what you know and what you cannot possibly understand, that faith is born. Faith is not built on clarity. Faith is carved from mystery. Faith does not start where you have it all figured out. Faith begins where understanding ends. This truth is ancient and yet urgently modern. In an age obsessed with proof, predictability, and control, faith feels like an act of rebellion. But faith is not the enemy of reason. Faith is the bridge that carries you beyond the limits of reason, into a territory reason cannot enter. This essay is a journey into that territory where the mind bows, the heart rises, and the soul finally breathes. The end of understanding, where the world falls silent. Every life eventually hits a wall, a diagnosis you didn't expect, a loss you didn't choose, a betrayal you didn't see coming, a future you can no longer predict. You stand there with trembling hands, realizing that the map you trusted has ended. You have no data to analyze, no proof to lean on, and suddenly the world that once made sense no longer does. This is the crossroads of the spirit, the place where your understanding is too small for what you're facing. Most people break here, because they were taught that strength comes from comprehension. But comprehension has boundaries. Human logic has borders. The mind hits ceilings. The soul does not. And it is precisely in that place where understanding collapses that God whispers, "Now step into something bigger." The limits of the light we already have understanding is a gift, but a limited one. You may understand your past. You may understand parts of your present, but you will never fully understand the unfolding of your destiny. Life is not a blueprint. It's a pilgrimage, and pilgrims walk without perfect knowledge. When God calls people forward in Scripture, He rarely gives explanations. He gives instruction, He gives direction, He gives promise, but rarely understanding. Noah didn't understand rain. Abraham didn't understand the journey. Moses didn't understand the Red Sea. Mary didn't understand the miracle inside her womb. The disciples didn't understand the cross. What they had was not comprehension, but trust. Understanding comforts the mind. Faith reshapes the soul. If God explained everything before asking you to move, you'd never need faith at all. When God doesn't make sense, the birthplace of real faith, there comes a point in every spiritual life when God's actions seem irrational, delayed, confusing, or painfully silent. And this is where people misinterpret divine mystery as divine absence. But God is not absent. He is inviting you deeper. You cannot grow faith in an environment of constant clarity. You cannot develop trust if you always agree with God. You cannot mature if life always affirms your expectations. Faith is not born from understanding God, but from trusting Him when you don't. Real faith begins the moment. Disappointment tempts you to walk away, but hope keeps you standing still. Real faith begins when you give God your confusion and receive His strength. Real faith begins when you step forward without knowing where the path leads. Faith is not the fruit of answers. It is the fruit of surrender. The treasure hidden in divine mystery is not the place where God hides information. Mystery is where God reveals Himself. For most of your life, you ask God to clarify His plans, but God often uses uncertainty to clarify your heart. When understanding ends, your illusions end too. your illusion of control, your illusion of self-sufficiency, your illusion of predictability. And in their absence, something sacred resides: dependence. Dependence is not weakness. Dependence is alignment. Dependence is the soul remembering its source. Dependence is what turns confusion into communion. You were never meant to live on explanations. You were meant to live on presence. Understanding asks for answers. Faith asks for God. Mystery is where you finally choose which one you want more. The paradox of faith. Waking in darkness with light inside you, faith does not eliminate darkness. Faith lights the darkness from within. You may walk through uncertainty, but uncertainty does not have to walk through you. You may not know what's next, but you do not walk alone. Faith gives you permission to move forward even when the path is hidden. It does not say, "I see the whole road." It says, "I see the one who walks with me." The mind says, "I must know before I move." Faith says, "Move and you will know." Understanding demands visibility. Faith thrives on willingness. You will be asked to close your eyes, not to blind yourself to reality, but to awaken yourself to a deeper one. When God asks you to step into the unknown, every great story begins with a step that makes no sense. Build an ark where no rain exists. Leave your homeland with no destination. Stand before a sea with no boat. Speak to a rock instead of striking it. Walk around a wall instead of attacking it. Throw down your nets after an empty night. Walk on water in the middle of a storm. God has been training His people in holy risk since the beginning of time, and every step He asks you to take beyond your understanding is not a test of intelligence, it is a training in trust. Faith begins when God leads you past the borders of your comfort. Faith begins when the path is strange. Faith begins when your mind says, "This is impossible," and your spirit hears, "With God, nothing is impossible." The unknown is not your enemy. The unknown is your invitation. The death of reason and the rise of revelation. Reason is good. God created reason, but reason cannot hold the weight of revelation. Understanding tells you what is happening. Faith tells you who is with you. Understanding gives knowledge. Faith gives vision. Revelation is what happens when God bypasses your intellect and speaks directly to your spirit. It is not irrational, but trans-rational. It doesn't contradict logic, it transcends it. Reason says, "I understand God," but revelation says, "I trust God even when I don't." Revelation does not need proof. Revelation becomes proof. The crisis that calls you into faith. Every person eventually hits a crisis that cannot be solved by intelligence, planning, strategy, or strength. A place where the soul whispers, "I can't fix this. I can't understand this. I can't carry this." This is not your failure. This is your initiation. The crisis is not the enemy, the crisis is the threshold. It is the moment. The self breaks so the soul can breathe. It is the moment your pride collapses so trust can rise. It is the moment the illusion of control finally loosens its grip, allowing God to take His rightful place in your life. Faith does not begin in comfort. Faith begins in surrender. Trusting the God you cannot predict. One of the most spiritually liberating truths you will ever learn is this: God is not predictable, but He is faithful. You cannot forecast His timing. You cannot decode His logic. You cannot anticipate His methods, but you can trust His heart. Faith is not believing that God will do what you expect. Faith is believing God will do what is right, even if it defies what you understand. And often, the greatest blessings are hidden in the things you cannot explain. The stillness where faith is formed. Faith grows in silence, not noise, in waiting, not rushing, in mystery, not clarity. There is a stillness that forms inside you when you finally stop demanding answers and start seeking presence. This stillness is not passive, is powerful. It is the moment you stop wrestling with God and start resting in Him. It is the moment you stop interrogating life and start listening to it. It is the moment you stop trying to control the future and start trusting the one who holds it. Stillness is where faith becomes maturity. Stillness is where the soul is trained to stand even when nothing makes sense. The miracle of trusting without knowing faith is the courage to take a step without knowing the outcome. It is the bravery to open your hands when everything in you wants to cling. It is the strength to release your own plans and trust a greater purpose. This is the miracle. Faith does not require sight yet. It sees more than sight ever could. Understanding sees facts. Faith sees truth. Understanding sees obstacles. Faith sees purpose. Understanding sees risk. Faith sees destiny. In the economy of heaven, not knowing is part of the miracle. It keeps you close. It keeps you humble. It keeps you guided, not by your mind, but by His Spirit. When understanding ends, God begins, God begins, God begins, God does His greatest work in the places where your understanding is weakest. He heals what you cannot explain. He restores what you cannot imagine. He protects you from what you cannot see. He guides you toward what you cannot predict. He transforms what you cannot control. Your understanding ends at the edge of the natural. God begins at the doorway of the supernatural. You do not need to understand the path to walk it. You do not need to understand the outcome to trust it. You do not need to understand God to be loved by Him. Faith is not understanding. God faith is walking with God. The freedom of letting go of certainty. Certainty is heavy. Certainty is rigid. Certainty is fragile. But faith is free. Faith releases the need to predict. Faith releases the need to control. Faith releases the need to rationalize everything God does. When you live by understanding, you limit your life to what your mind can grasp. But when you live by faith, you open your life to what God can accomplish, and God can accomplish infinitely more than you can imagine. Freedom begins where certainty ends. Faith begins where understanding ends. Life begins where surrender begins. The humility of not knowing. The soil of greatness, the people God uses most powerfully, are not those who understand the most but those who trust the deepest. God does not look for brilliance. He looks for willingness. He does not choose the people who have it all figured out. He chooses the people who say, "I don't understand, but I will follow." That sentence has shaped heroes. That sentence has moved mountains. That sentence has written history. Humility is the soil where faith grows, and "I don't know" is the seed. The beauty of walking with a God beyond your understanding. If God were small enough to be fully understood, He would not be big enough to be fully trusted. You were never meant to reduce God to comprehension. You were meant to rise into communion. Faith lets you walk with a God who is larger than your logic, kinder than your expectations, wiser than your plans, and more faithful than your fears. Faith allows you to step into a world shaped not by certainty, but by divine possibility. It is a beautiful way to live, to trust what you cannot see, to surrender what you cannot control, to follow where you cannot predict. This is not blindness. This is spiritual sight, the final truth where you end. God continues, your understanding will fail. Your plans will shift, your expectations will break, but God remains, and when you reach the edge of your knowledge, you finally step into His. This is where faith begins, not in the places you understand Him, but in the places you need Him. Your mind may reach its limit, your logic may fail, your certainty may crumble, but faith was never built on what you understood. Faith was built on who He is. The invitation to a deeper life faith begins where understanding ends is not just a statement, it is an invitation into a life of trust, of surrender, of holy courage, of divine dependence, of walking where only God can lead. Understanding keeps you safe. Faith makes you alive. Understanding builds walls. Faith opens doors. Understanding limits you to what is known. Faith expands you into what is possible. Step past your questions. Step beyond your logic. Step into the mystery, because the moment your understanding ends, God finally begins.